So this has had a little over a day to cure. I've water washed this. You can see how white the epoxy residue is. And my next task is to just sand lightly, clean up this top edge a little bit. And I'll also sand this wood a little bit at the same time. So that's my immediate task. And my task after that is to lightly sand this epoxy coating on the birdwatcher combings / deck beams. I think I'm just going to do that by hand. Just a very light sand. I don't want to go through it. Just enough to accept high build primer. And finally up here, I will shape these protruding ends of the new trim, probably like I did with the gunnels, 45-degree angle-ish. So the day's sanding is complete. There will be more sanding because I've got a little more fill to do here and there. Mostly, especially on this side, it's pretty close. Just a little touch-up filler so that this is perfectly smooth right to the edge everywhere. And I fine-tune this. I'll have to re-epoxy coat that because I sanded it all off to clean that up a little more, but that's easy. Up here, what I think I'm going to do is just install an epoxy fillet between this edge and this edge. Fill this little gap. It'll shed water down into the anchor locker that way or off the top. But this is all pretty good. Just a little more fill work to be done. Some of these screw holes. I've lightly sanded the epoxy on the combings / deck beams. So I'm calling those ready for primer. Back here, the aft end, I cut this down to the top of the hull here. Put a little 45-degree angle on the aft end so it didn't taper to a needle point. And I'm not quite sure yet how this is going to coordinate with the trim, whatever I'm putting back here. I don't even know what this is going to be yet. So this well may change, but it's a start. So that's where we are. Ready for a little bit more epoxy work. Clean this up now and get some epoxy on, and then I can turn to this cockpit trim maybe. Quick application of fairing compound over these screw holes, and this edge just is needed to fill any little tiny voids. This is probably going to take care of it all. This will get one more sanding. We'll clean up the wood, and this should be ready for high build primer thereafter. Up here around the anchor well, I masked off inside and out, and I created a little angled fillet. It runs through there and runs right over the center of the stem, down the other side. This will get painted, and it'll shed water. This is what we're going with here. So the next step is trim around the cockpit. So the cockpit trim needs to be over 7 feet long. These pieces are about 13. I have one piece milled down to 1.5 by 3/4 that I planed and milled previously, but that's the last piece of milled trim I have. I also have this offcut that is not planed. It's rough on both sides. So I'm going to have to mill this down and plane it to 3/4 in thickness in order to have enough trim, because I can't get 2 7+ foot pieces out of 13 feet. I think what I'm going to do is take some of it off on the table saw, resaw it down a little bit, save some planer time, and then I'll plane it for the last 1/8 inch or so. So the way this trim interacts here, it's a little awkward. Probably should have thought this all through first, but that's okay. We're adapting. So I've cut off the extended part of this deck trim, this piece of cockpit trim, which is 1 inch tall by 3/4 wide with a round over on the bottom. It's going to fit right in at that angle and at this bend, and then I'll bend it down. It's a little tricky to do it this way. It's not the ideal way. Would have been better if I had put this cockpit trim on and let it extend up and then cut it off to accommodate this. but I didn't do it that way. So here we are. And there's the starboard outer coaming permanently installed. It's just clamped in place with epoxy. There's really no way to screw it. Got some excess here that I'll cut off later. And then later I will put a flat piece, a narrow or a thin flat piece on here just to cover this. This wasn't too bad, even though I hampered myself at the forward end here because I already had this existing trim to butt into, and that's tough on a curve. But I made it work. I'm happy enough with it. Filled with epoxy, you'll never see it if I stop pointing it out. So we'll leave that overnight. Pretty much used all my junky glue clamps, so I'm not going to try to glue the other side right now. I'll wait till this side's unclamped, and then I'll have these clamps available. And this is the port cockpit coaming permanently installed. Process was just like the other side. A little quicker, no guesswork. I knew what I was doing. So we'll leave these two pieces to cure overnight, at least. Unclamp and do this top trim piece, and this will be done for trim. Next morning, and I've just spent an hour and a half or so unmasking and unclamping and sanding everything that I did yesterday. So these are the new cockpit coamings. They've sanded flat and flush on the top. I'm going to mill a trim piece, a thin trim piece to fit on top of this and cover this end grain. The joints came out pretty good here at the change in shear line, considering that it really isn't how I should have done it, but worked out pretty well in the end. And these are sanded through 120, and that's pretty much all it's going to get for now, other than one more sanding once I put this top piece of trim on. Forward part of the boat, I'm calling ready for primer. Sanded all the screw holes and the edge again. I'm happy with where it is, so we're going to go with primer on that. Up here at the anchor well, my little fillet came out pretty well. A couple little touch-up places on this curve where I troweled that in, and I've got a little gap here where the deck trim meets the curve that I have on the hull. That needs a little bit of epoxy to fill that flush like this one here. But I'm happy with how that has turned out. And back down the other side. We're all good on this. And then into the cockpit trim. Here's the transition there. Worked out pretty well. My next step is to mill a piece approximately 1 1/8 inches by 1/4, and we'll glue that on the top here. Here's what I ended up with. 2 pieces about 1 1/8 inches wide, 1/4 inch thick, rounded on both sides, and sanded smooth and clean to get saw marks off and so forth. And I'm just going to glue these right on top. Cut an angle that's appropriate at the forward end. Whatever I need up here to match that as closely as possible. And glue it in place. This is the final piece of cockpit and exterior hull trim. This is glued in place with epoxy. It's got some brads, stainless brads, tacking it in place, and I added a few clamps for good measure to squeeze it down a little bit more. Brads did a good job. It would have been enough. This just got me a little bit more squeeze out. So we'll let this cure overnight, unclamp it, a little final sanding on this, and we'll be all done with all of this pre-primer work. Can get to work on actual primer prep. So I got my outboard delivered. We'll cover that another time. It's a Tohatsu 30 remote control designed to be bolted to the transom. And looking at the bracket and the measurements, I got a little nervous that the 2x8 would not be wide enough to capture all 4 bolts. I decided before I get into paint, I took the opportunity to add this little piece underneath. It's just another section of the same 2x8, and it's 16 inches long at the top, a little narrower at the bottom. I've got a 5-degree angle on each side, and a little 5-degree angle on the edges as well, similar to what I did on the main brace. And I've got that epoxied in place, and there's just 4 little screws holding it to kind of clamp it, because there was no way for me to clamp this. So that's epoxied in place underneath the original one. Got a nice fillet around it, and it's all coated with epoxy. So this was kind of a last minute installation. I'd rather have it there and not need it than need it. Board across the top is really designed for a clamp-on outboard, and this one's going to be bolted in 4 places. And there's a wide variety of hole locations, but I need to make sure I can put this where it needs to go. So this ought to take care of that. Good morning. I've just sanded the last sanding for now. Cleaned up this new little cap on the combings. So this is ready now for the boat to get into primer. So as far as I'm going to take this for now. I'll do varnish and such later. Across the boat as a look at how it looks from the inside. There's a tiny little seam there, which perhaps when I get this varnished, I'll mask everything off and squeeze some sealant in there just to kind of close that up. So here's how this turned out. This looks good. Finishes off the last unfinished part of the boat, for at least in a major way. There is probably going to be more trim like here. And in addition, this has really stiffened up this part of the boat. So this is a structural piece, not just a cosmetic piece. If I was building this more to spec, this would have been pine and painted, but I chose to put a couple of bits of clear finished wood on this boat just for a little bit of extra appearance. Otherwise, all these parts could have been pine and painted, and that would be a totally good solution. And here at the transom, I lightly sanded as needed this little extra piece I put down, cleaned up the corners, lightly sanded the fillets, and that's ready for high build. That was a quick and easy installation, and I'm sure I'm going to be glad that I put that in there. So the final step for the immediate moment was solvent wash the entire exterior of the boat And I've rinsed off the floor to settle the dust. And from here, the next step is going to be masking and final paint prep. The only reference points for the waterline, the designed waterline on this boat, are these two lines right here. We've got one that says 1,000 pounds and one that says 1,500 pounds. And they're just drawn here at the forward end of the boat. That's as far as they extend. So I took a straight edge and I drew across the 1,500 pound mark. We're definitely going to mark a waterline for the heaviest weight. And I drew it across the plan view and all the way across the boat. So that's the supposed waterline at 1,500 pounds. Now I don't know exactly what the boat weighs, but apparently he's calculated that it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. So we're going to use that 1,500 pound mark and try to get some reference points that I can use to recreate this on the boat. I'm going to go higher than that, but I need to get that point. So the 1,500 pound mark crosses the hull right at station 4. And you can also see over here on the half breadth. So if we call station 4 where it meets the bottom, so if we call that the supposed forward end of the waterline, that's easy enough to find on the boat. And I'm going to go like 2 inches higher than this for the waterline. So I can mark 2 inches up from that point. That gives me a forward line. The hull is kind of a slab, so it won't be too tough to strike this. But I need an after point. And this drawing's not to any known scale, but I'm assuming that it is scalable. So if I take some of these known measurements that he's marked here and kind of extrapolate out, I've got a few. I've got 6 inches, 9 inches, 7 1/8. So from this, maybe I can figure out what an inch is on this drawing, and then I can measure up on the stern where my mark needs to be. So it turns out 9 inches on this drawing is basically 1 inch, 1 inch on a ruler. And this pretty much equates to the 6 inch mark, which is about 3/4 of an inch. Using those measurements and doing my best extrapolation, I've come up with, and this will be 2 inches above the designed waterline, I've come up with my mark here, 6.75 inches above the very bottom of the boat in a vertical line right at the corner of the transom. And that's not what it shows on the ruler, but it shows almost 9 on the ruler. So that equates to 6.75 inches. Not to get too confusing, but 1 inch on the drawing equals 1.78 sixteenths on my scale. So 2 inches is about 3.5 sixteenths, which is about, I'm using a 1/4 inch for that. So up here at station 4, I've made a mark 1/4 inch above where the 1,500 pound line marks, and I've made a line there. And then I use that same math to come up with this for the aft end. And that is straight. The new line I've struck here is parallel to the other two, so my rough conversion is working. So that's what I'm going to use to mark the bottom. With luck, that'll give me approximately 2 inches of bottom paint above the actual floating water line, which is what I want. Then I'll have a boot top above that, but that'll be easier to mark once I get these other marks in place. Now we'll put that into practice and make some marks on the boat and strike a line and see what it looks like. So my first task this morning was to strike and mask off the water line. This represents the top edge of the bottom paint and the bottom edge of the colors that are going on the hull. To strike this line, I used the measurements I figured out from the plans, and from the transom, including across the aft end of the transom, and from the transom all the way up to station 12, basically midships. That's right here. I was able to make a series of measurements off the bottom of the boat because the bottom's actually flat up to station 12. So that made the aft part very easy to strike, get a straight line. And then from there, I eyeballed the tape line up to station 4 where it dies out into the chine. This is station 4. And I just eyeballed that tape line so that it looked straight till it dies out. And then it does this funky, it's always hard to go around external chines. It does this funky thing and then continues till it dies out into the bottom, just over a foot shy of the actual stem. I did this on both sides. I actually started on the port side because I have a better view over here. I can get a little further away from the boat so I could eyeball it, make sure I liked what I was seeing. This line is 2 inches above the line shown on the plans as the water line, and that gives some extra bottom paint above the water line, which not only looks better, but it protects the hull paint. And then at the transom, it was pretty easy to make a few reference marks and basically just tape from each side corner across. So that's where we ended up on the water line. The key to striking a line is to be at eye level. Try and get the camera down. It's a little funky the way the bow works around that external chine, but it looks like basically a straight and fair line to where it dies out under the boat. It's very hard at the bow to see with that external chine and the way it wraps around, but that's just what it has to do. It's got to go across somewhere. So I just run it from where it leaves the vertical edge of the hull across to where the tape comes up to the top of the chine from down here. About as far away as I can get before I lose the boat in the darkness. I don't really want paint inside these port openings because I'm probably going to have to fine tune them a little when I install the ports. So I've just taped over the edge from outside, and then I'll tape the entire thing from inside. Spent the day mostly masking. Masking took longer than I expected, frankly. About 5 hours to mask everything you see here, from the waterline to the interior and to all the trim. And as of now, this has been through its final solvent wash with the proprietary wipe down solvent. So it's pristine and clean, and everything is ready for high build primer. Everything's masked, ports are masked, all the trim is masked, the little drain holes into the anchor well are masked from inside, and the inside of the slot is masked. That was a pain. Anchor well is all masked off from the top, just below my little edge here. And this is ready to go. It's a beautiful, nice, warm day today. Shop's open. It's nice and warm in here. It'll be easy to keep the temperature up tonight. Cockpit's masked off. Companionway or slot is masked off. Kept it below this edge. That'll probably get trim at some point, but it's going to be painted first. And this section back here I won't touch until it's time for hull primer. This has already been through to finish primer when I did the interior. And if it gets a little overspray, it's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. But this will eventually get hull primer and hull color in this section. So everything's good to go. Took a second and just cut a little kerf in here at the center line, just so we don't lose the center line with the paint. So that'll be permanent. And I am anxious to paint. This was a lot of work today. It's a deceptively large boat, or deceptively small, whichever way it's correct, I'm never sure. But there was a lot of masking. This trim took forever, and the gunnels down underneath is a challenging place to get this. And the only thing left to do is get my paint and supplies ready, and I'll be good to go early tomorrow morning and get the high build primer on every surface.